যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. And today we have for the first time Mr. Ross Mallick with us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining my podcast.
No problem.
And as you all know, we have discussed countless papers written by him from our live streams. He is sort of the foremost authority on the Marichjhapi massacre. And we have loads of questions to ask him. So first of all, good morning. And firstly, tell me, sir, how did you get involved into the Marichjhapi research? Why was it so important to you?
Well, I was doing my PhD at Cambridge, and I was doing it on development policy in West Bengal. At that time, it was a communist government at the time. In the sense, I was set up. My father's cousin was Panchayat Secretary of West Bengal in the Indian Administrative Service. And he took me on a tour of the Sundarbans. And while I was there on the district collector's launch, a boat that was going up and down the river, he introduced me to another government official. And the government official started to talk to me about the Marichjhapi massacre. And at that time, it was only 2 or 3 years before the massacre had occurred, and so that got my interest. And I thought maybe my father's cousin had set me up so that I'd find out about the massacre. And so then, of course, when I went back to Calcutta, I asked my sources about it, and everybody seemed to have heard about it. The people I talked to, some of them supported the CPM. There'd only been a couple of people killed, and it was necessary victim and all this and the other. But it was pretty clear that I'd missed the massacre, and it wasn't being covered in the daily press. So that's when I started looking into it and trying to find out who was responsible, basically. And it was pretty obvious it was who was responsible. It didn't take a lot of research to figure that out. You just had to know the decision-making structure within the CPM and that to find out who is really responsible. But basically, it went up to the prime minister even. They approved it in a sense, but the chief minister was the one who gave the order.
So why are you so difficult to track down on the internet? Did you have safety concerns because of your the nature of your research?
No, I didn't. I mean, I'm retired now, so I don't have an active presence. But I guess if you look around, maybe you can find me, or maybe not. I don't know why it was so difficult.
And especially online, anytime I search your name on Google, either your papers come up or my videos on your papers come up. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Sir, what was it like when you first came to know that, well, the number is not just 1 or 2, because till date that's the official number, right? Maybe one person died.
Yeah.
When did you stumble upon the fact that, well, too many people died?
Well, at that trip on the district magistrate's launch, that government official told me, hundreds could have died. We don't know. I mean, basically, no one knew. There'd been no investigation. There still hasn't been an official investigation. But I was certainly curious after that, because it seemed like a big issue, but it wasn't a big issue, at least at the time when I was there. And so I thought, well, what really happened? And of course, I was in no position to go around counting how many had died, but at least I could get it from other sources. And we still don't know how many died, but it certainly wasn't one or two. It was significantly higher, and so that made it much more significant. The fact that something like this could have been covered up for so long.
Sir, just to set aside one particular question from that will come from CPIM supporters even today, which is, since the official number is 1 or 2, where are you getting the other numbers? How do we trust such a person, you or anybody else researching this? How are we to be sure that you are not doing this just to defame the CPIM?
Well, you can just look at the internet. Look up, there's a number of people who've now done research on it. There's even books on it. There's videos you can look up interviewing people, including survivors of the massacre. So I'd say just start online and, look up all the articles and books you can find, and various videos and movies have been made on it, documentaries. There's quite a few out now. Since the fall of the Left Front, it's become a more open issue and people have done more research on it. So, I mean, just a simple search, a Google search on Marichjhapi massacre, you'll find a Wikipedia, and from there you can go on for pages of information on it. And that's how you can find out what the survivors said about it, even what some government officials admitted to and things like that. So it's really opened up in the recent years. So it's not just my word for it. It's a word of witnesses, government officials, all kinds of things have come out. So I don't think that 1 or 2 is taken seriously by anyone but the most loyal CPM supporters. So I think it's pretty definitive. What we don't know is that, four-figure number. Is it 6? Is it 5? Whatever. We don't know that. I mean, it's very difficult unless you had a government inquiry or a big NGOs looked into it and started surveying people. You could find out, but that takes resources, and the individuals that have done it so far don't have those kind of resources to actually find out a definitive number. So it's speculative, but it's certainly not the official number, and how high up it goes, we don't know, and we may never know actually.
What were the difficulties that you faced during the beginning of your research, and how you were not allowed to even publish later after CPIM went out of power? Take us through that story.
Well, that's a long story going over decades. I can go into a lot of details. It's in my book, a draft book. It's not. I couldn't get it ever published. In fact, I couldn't even get an article on it published. This century. So it's really closed off. I mean, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to publish it in India or abroad. So it's on the internet. It's free on the internet on ResearchGate or Academia EDU, which is free, and anyone can get it with the internet. So you can get the details of that because it's a long story. I don't know how much I should go into it, but there was a lot of opposition, and clearly even now, when I send out either my article or my book, it gets rejected. No one will touch it. I don't know if they're afraid or they don't want to offend people because, it's a lot of, how would you say, control over the media or fear. I mean, maybe people are just afraid of what will happen to them. And that's the same with witnesses. They're often very reluctant to come forward. So that is a difficult problem. And in my book draft, I go into in great detail why it's so difficult. But basically, no one seems to want to take it up, except for a few individuals who've done some good work on it. But it's a handful of individuals. They're not affiliated with any political party. They're just independent people who want to find out what happened. And they've done the research. And so I based a lot of it on what they've done. I'm not the only person doing this. And there are a number of things, a number of items, a number of books, videos. And if you look up my draft book, you can see all the sources for that.
Now, the people who are refusing to publish your work today, they do not obviously fear CPIM's police or goons anymore. So what is the fear then? A breakdown of the discourse that the left has created all over the world. Do you have anything against leftist politics or communist ideology in general? Do you see this as an extension of their ideology?
Well, I mean, you could say CPM is basically a Stalinist party. So, I mean, Stalin killed millions of people. So, I mean, ideologically, someone who follows that doesn't have an inherent opposition to killing some more, So I don't think that is a problem. But even among the general left, they don't want to be criticized too much. And they're basically the left front is responsible because they ordered it. But there's also other parties. Now, at the time the massacre happened, the CPM had a lot of MPs in Delhi. And the Prime Minister Desai's government was dependent on the communists to stay in power. So they didn't want to antagonize the left front government in West Bengal. And so they basically didn't okay it as much, but they covered it up. They sort of gave Prime Minister Desai gave a green light. You go ahead. We're not going to stop you. And so he went ahead and did it. But basically, the Desai government covered it up. So the parties that come out of that also have an interest in not examining it or going into it too deeply, because it sort of implicates all the parties. And then if you go to the history of it, I mean, the Congress was in power after independence. They created the parliament by refusing to allow the refugees to settle in West Bengal. They sent them to central India, and they didn't treat them very well. They exploited them. There was inadequate food and water and things like that, so they couldn't grow their crops. So in a sense, the Congress party set up the problem. And then after that, when the left front, well, that was a good reason for the left front to say, oh, we'll let you settle in West Bengal, you can settle in Marichjhapi, and they sort of made it an issue in the election campaign. Then, of course, when they came to power, why should we spend a lot of money? We've got our own poor people, so we'll let you settle in Marichjhapi as long as you don't expect government assistance. So they were allowed to come and settle in Marichjhapi. Then for some reason, which we don't entirely know about, but the decision was made, no, they should not be allowed to stay there. We got to send them back. And that's when the problem really began, because not only were they not willing to support them in terms of giving them aid, they wouldn't let anyone else aid them. They made a blockade. Even, private aid agencies weren't allowed to send food or water or anything. And so they set a blockade, and it was an island, so it's very easy to cut them off from supplies. And so when that didn't work, basically then they sent in the police and they killed a lot of people, and eventually they were forcibly removed. And that's where you get the debate of how many were killed or not.
Yeah, and the people who came, they weren't really looking for government handouts all that much, right? They seem to be pretty self-dependent because they cleared out forests and set up their own farming situations and were fishing. They wanted an access to Kolkata's fish markets. So was government handouts even necessary for them?
Well, they didn't get any, basically. They met with Jyoti Basu, and Jyoti Basu says, well, he didn't seem to be very keen on it anymore, even though he promised it when he was in opposition, but he wasn't too keen on it. He said, okay, we'll let you settle in Marichjhapi, and we don't expect any government assistance for us. But of course, they settled there. They settled there, and then they built up a village. They had a school, health clinic, and they were fishing and starting to grow crops and things like that without government assistance. But they had some private individuals and organizations help them. That's why the government didn't succeed. Even though they didn't give them any aid, they were doing quite well on their own. And so it didn't work. So that's when they decided, they took it a step further and decided we'll blockade them, boycott them, so they'll starve to death, and that way they'll be forced to leave. Well, that didn't work. And so then because they were dying and they weren't giving up. So then the government decided to go in and forcibly remove them, and they killed a lot. They burned the huts and all the facilities and sent them back to Dandakarna in central India.
Yeah.
And,
Sir, these refugees were... sorry, please finish your point.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. These refugees were the most vulnerable of people, leaving all they had in Bangladesh and coming here and setting up shop in a random forest. So why didn't they require government handouts to survive? Because we are a democratic socialist country, so is Canada. The conventional wisdom sort of is that without government handouts, poor people can't survive. How did these people survive, and how did they thrive, in fact?
Well, if you look at Marichjhapi, I mean, it was more or less a virgin forest. You just cut the trees down, you start growing crops. It doesn't take a lot to start that. Also, there's fisheries, so that's readily available if you know how to fish. And they came from Bangladesh, which, was basically the same similar terrain. It was a delta, a lot of it. So they had all the skills. They'd been fishermen, they'd been farmers. So just a question of finding a suitable spot. And Marichjhapi had the sort of layout that was suitable for growing crops, and you can set up how would you say, dikes, so that you can keep the water out, the saline water out, and then you can grow crops. So it didn't take a lot to start it out if you had the skills, and so that's what they did. And they got some assistance, as I say, from various charities and development agencies, but not the government. But that was enough to get them going, and that's why at some point the government said, well, this isn't working for us. And they decided, but we don't know exactly why they killed them, why they'd go to that extent. Was it an ego thing from Jyoti Basu that he felt they were undermining the authority of the CPM because they were independent? They weren't dependent on the government. You couldn't count on their vote block because they were being opposed by the government then. So, but they could have initially they did support them. I mean, when they were in opposition, but it doesn't cost much to make a election campaign promise. It's when you actually get into power and then you actually have to do it that people they come up short when they don't do it. You know, but yeah, so it was basically they betrayed the election promise, and but why they had to go to the extent of killing them when they're already settled there and they were thriving, that's another question. You know, and it's been debated, but we don't really know. I mean, we don't have the transcripts of the Politburo or the State Committee or things like that, and who felt what. You know, there were some people in the CPM who opposed it, but they were in control of policy. So what could they do? You know, it's very much a centralist party, and the people at the top really are the ones who decide policy. Individual distance members don't really have much of a say.
Jyoti Basu's decision to completely backtrack on his promise, how much of it was based on simply inter-party conflicts within the left front government? Was Jyoti Basu afraid that some other party would take away too much of praises and stuff?
Well, there were divisions in the left front, including, you know, the government ministers and things like that. So the RSP, Revolutionary Socialist Party, actually supported the settlers settling there and gave them some assistance, but not from the government, but from the party. And they had a big base in that area where the Marichjhapi was. So there were splits in the left front government. Some parties supporting, some parties opposed. But the CPM was the dominant one. They really controlled policy. So the policy came from the CPM. But the left front just went along with it, you know, for the most part, except the RSP, which opposed it. But I mean, they didn't quit the left front over it. They just had to accept it once they'd been massacred. But it discredited the left with a lot of refugees and things like that. So that's why they tried to cover it up, because there's a large proportion of Dalits in West Bengal. So it's not something they wanted to publicize. So yeah, so there was a division in the left front over it, but the dominant position was the CPM, and they're the ones who basically decided to evict them.
Yeah.
And it was basically
Now
the chief minister.
Yes.
And
Now, so this phenomenon of leftists standing by each other even when one of them is a criminal, we see this is sort of a leitmotif in Indian society even today. We have had at least two pretty famous leftist journalists complain later on, months later or a year later, that a Muslim colleague was harassing them and was giving them threats, etc. But they did not bring it out in public, only because the so-called Hindutva fascist government will crack down harder on Muslims because of that, or there will be a discourse against Muslims. That's why these two women did not speak up. It seems similar to your situation, where the leftists of the world are uniting against you and not letting you publish because the leftist discourse will get weakened. Do you think this is the case? And if so, is this herd mentality?
Well, I don't know if it's herd mentality, but I mean, there is a tendency not to expose your shortcomings. And the massacre was a shortcoming. And so, yeah, that's part of it, but that's only on the left. On the right, you know, untouchables also, you know, they're not anyone who's, you know, patriotic, doesn't like, you know, the massacre of untouchables to expose in the foreign media or anywhere else for that matter, because it shows the country's shortcomings. You know, if you can't protect the most vulnerable people, then, you know, what kind of society do you have? You know, so on the right, there's also an opposition because it shows India in a bad light. And so the people on the right don't like it to be exposed. The people on the left, well, one of their allies or one of the parties, they actually killed them. So there's a difference. You know, there's one is the CPM killed them, but then there's a whole range of politicians on the right who would not want to expose it. And the fact that some of the people on the right were in the Morarji Desai's coalition government, so they covered it up. They didn't do it, but they covered it up by, you know, in order to keep the support of the left front. So it's a complicated political situation that's hard to explain nowadays when it's not current politics and it's history. But I mean, that's why the left front could get away with it. You know, sometimes the center could have stopped it or said, we're not going to help you. But instead, because they wanted the left front support in the Lok Sabha, they basically went along with it and covered it up. You know, so it actually creates problems for both the right and the left. It's right across the political spectrum. So anyone I would send, you know, articles to try and get published, if they're Indian, they may feel it's anti-patriotic, you know, it's anti-India. So whatever their politics, they wouldn't want it out because it shows India in a bad light, frankly. And Dalits, untouchables in many villages is still segregated. So in effect, basically Dalits are the last segregated population in the world, and there's 200 million of them. So the fact that they're still segregated, no other country in the world has such a segregation in practice, if not law, that makes India look bad. So no one wants to really talk about that issue very much. And so they, and any academic who, if you send it to an academic publisher, they have to send it out to specialists in the field. And so what I say in my draft is quite critical of their colleagues and of their positions, and I analyze all that. So it's not an article or a book they'd want to actually get published.
So do you follow any contemporary Indian politics at all?
A little bit, but I'm not living there, so I don't have a day-to-day understanding of it. I just have a general understanding. I try and keep up with the general politics, but I don't have a micro analysis of what happens where, So it's a long.
What do you think? Yeah, I have a macro question only. What do you think of today's right-wing party that is in power, or the so-called right wing that is in power, or the right-wing general views of the country today? Do you think they are as casteist as the yesteryears?
Well, I don't know the difference. I mean, and it's not just how they handle untouchables. It's also how they handle Muslims and things like that. It's all minorities. And it's not very promising. I mean, there's been, in the recent few days in West Bengal, there's been attacks on Muslims. They're putting up a border fence. They didn't in the election, appears, and I'm only doing this secondhand, but it appears that the election commission cut out a lot of Muslim voters. So they may be rigging it in a way that in the old days, the CPM used to rig elections in the countryside. Now it seems the BJP is doing the same, but using the election commission. So that's what I heard secondhand, but that is worrying because it's meaning that democracy is under threat. And a lot of the people that attack Dalits now, I mean, they aren't part of the BJP, but they're part of the BJP's constituency. So the far right who are actually killing Dalits may support the BJP, but the BJP also wants to keep the Dalits inside their coalition. So they're sort of the BJP's caught in the middle. They've got one section of their followers that are anti-Dalit, and the others that are more pro-Dalit and want to include them in Hinduism. So they're in a bit of a pickle. But in terms of Marichjhapi, BJP's been the national government for a number of years now. They could have got their own investigation, which they didn't do. The current chief minister, when he was in opposition in West Bengal, promised to be an investigation into Marichjhapi. We'll just have to see if he does it now. But he should do it now because he's now the chief minister. He has the support of the national government as well as the provincial government, the state government. So they could do it. So we'll see how sincere they are. We'll see if they do an investigation or not. Because the previous Tamil Congress, they promised to do an investigation also. They never did it. And now it's his turn, and we'll see if he does it. So I'm waiting to see if anything comes of it or not. But it's decades ago. So now you're talking elderly survivors. And they'll soon pass away, so there'll be no live witnesses. But for the moment, there's still some, so there's still time to do it, actively if they want to do it. So it's a question of political will, because they certainly can do it now.
Yeah. So now coming to the crux of the matter, how much of the entire massacre, or Jyoti Basu backtracking on his promise, was it, do you think, because of the castes of those people?
Well, I don't know if Jyoti Basu was personally anti-caste, anti-untouchable, but he was working in a social milieu where he could get away with it. If it had been an elite group, probably there'd be more opposition, there'd be more press coverage. It'd have been a lot more difficult for him to do it to elite people. But because of the social milieu, the refugees don't have a lot of local connections. They don't have the vote at that point. They had a vote in national elections or in the local state, but they didn't have it in West Bengal because they were just migrant refugees. They didn't have it at that point. So they had limited clout themselves. And, it's basically all the chief ministers, had been upper caste. The party cadre were upper caste for the most part. So there was no sort of compulsion to hold back on the massacre. He knew he could get away with it because of the low status of the refugees. And so that was an enabling condition. Whether he was anti-Dalit or not is another question in his personal philosophy. I don't think he was. But he certainly knew he could get away with it because of how poor these people were and how badly their connections were. So he got away with it. And he did get away with it. I mean, nothing happened while the left front was in power. Nothing much happened after that. I mean, no one was really bothered. They still aren't bothered, quite frankly. So that's why it's gone uncovered for the most part, since.
Yes.
Why there's been, like, take the Sikhs, the killing of Indira Gandhi. There's been 8 or 9 commissions looking into it. That's how
Yes.
powerful the Sikhs are. Oh, they're only 2% of the populations. The Dalits are about 16% of the population. Yeah, these people get 9 commissions. The Dalits in Marichjhapi got none. There's no commission has been set up to actually investigate it. So that shows the power imbalance. So the only thing the Dalits have is their numbers at election time. So that gives them some clout, but it's not been enough to have an investigation. So that shows you where their real power is.
And sir,
as for the earlier question, I didn't
go on.
answer it. You were asking, did I have a political affiliation? Well, I've changed in my philosophy over the years. At one time, I guess you could say I was a Marxist. And I actually wanted to be supervised at Sussex by Biplab Das Gupta, who was a leader of the CPM at the time. But I didn't go to Sussex because he came back to West Bengal and he was working for the CPM government. So that's why I went to Oxford instead. And so that's what happened there. So at one time I was sympathetic, but when I came to West Bengal and I saw what was going on, I became sort of alienated from them. And being a scholar, I wanted to take a more objective view. So I wanted to look at it from both sides. But in the end, I felt the left front was failing. And I wrote that in my book, which I did get published from Cambridge University Press. And that goes into all the government policies on development and things like that. And so, I just felt it wasn't being implemented very well. The policies weren't really oriented in a good way. And so that was why I took a more objective view on it. And, I didn't I wasn't an uncritical supporter of the left front. I became more and more critical over time.
So did you have an emotional attachment with this cause as well, or were you just another dispassionate observer in this situation?
Well, I mentioned in my book, my family first organized the Namasudras, the Dalits in early, and my father's uncles were ministers in the United Bengal. It was part of the, Ambedkar movement. So, we came from a Namasudra community. But my mother is Scottish, actually. My father is Bengali Dalit,
Okay.
So I did have that sort of emotional attachment. And it's quite possible I have relatives that were killed at Marichjhapi. I don't know that because it's a very sprawled out family. There's some living in Dandakarna now who are my relatives. I know that much. But whether they're actually killed at Marichjhapi, I don't know that. But it's quite possible. It's a probability, I would say, given how big the family was. If you go far enough back in terms of relations, there probably were some killed there, but I don't know their names, or I never met them, obviously, because I came to it afterwards. So, there is that political dimension of it, So, and of course, once partition happened, the Dalits, had to flee from Bangladesh, where the main base was, over to India. And so and they lost basically their political clout. And so the movement has broken up to some extent. But it's still an emotional thing there. The Dalits still have their identity. It's not as if that's been destroyed, but they lost their political power.
Sir, I was just about to segue into this very topic. That what do you think of Jagannath Mandal?
Jagannath Mandal, I don't know. I never knew him personally. I think he may have been a rival with our family to some extent. But so there's internal politics in the Dalit movement. And so I think there may have been rivals. They made different alliances. So, but I think on this issue, on Marichjhapi, his son wrote a book on Marichjhapi. So, and I got that translated into English and posted online. So on Marichjhapi.com, you can look up all this literature in Bengali or in English, and it's all been translated. So there's a vast literature online on Marichjhapi.com, which will go into that, including Mandal's book on the subject, his son's book on the subject. So I met him myself, and I talked to him. I don't have any. At this stage, I don't have any differences. He's dead now, but I don't have any differences with him in terms of that, because all these internal divisions are ancient history as far as I'm concerned. All my relatives of that generation have passed away. So I don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of all the differences they had. But in general, they're both supported Ambedkar, so I don't have any differences on that.
Sir, the worst, let's say, maybe in some ways it's accurate even. The worst thing you can say about today's Hindu right is that it's very Islamophobic. So if they are Islamophobic in reality, and that if the worst things are believed about them, that they want to kick out or kill any Muslim that they set their eyes on, wouldn't it make sense for this Hindu right to be very, very anti-caste and therefore unite all castes and be united against Muslims? In that context, was Jagannath Mondal right to ally with Muslims? Because it was proven right. The Hindu nationalists were proven right, since Jagannath Mondal had to flee back to India. So is Dalit and Muslim alliance even possible?
Well, it was an alliance at that time, but of course, since then it's changed, because the people in Marichjhapi were actually refugees from East Pakistan or Bangladesh. And so they were obviously driven out of a Muslim-ruled state. So they wouldn't be too happy with Muslims. And so that division that developed made it difficult to ally with the Muslims and the Hindus. I mean, Muslims and Dalits. But in terms of historical necessity now, because they're being attacked, the Muslims are being attacked, and they're a large minority, and Dalits are a large minority, and they're both being discriminated against in different ways, then it makes sense for them to ally with, for all the minorities to make an alliance, because if they could get together politically, they have a good chance of with other coalition partners taking the national government. So it makes sense for an alliance. Our political necessity now is for an alliance of minorities so that they can remove the BJP. But in terms of Hindus, I mean, caste is a fundamental part of Hinduism. It's in the texts and all that. And untouchables, really, philosophically, Hinduism doesn't offer anything to untouchables. It's not a emancipatory religion in that sense. So basically, the BJP can give a lot of handouts at election time, or perhaps some programs that may get the vote of Dalits, but it's not in their political interest to support the BJP. It's not in the interests of how would you say, philosophical or religious emancipation to go with the right-wing BJP, even though the BJP may be wanting their inclusion for vote reasons or because they have more of a liberal approach to caste and internal divisions in the Hindu movement. I don't think Hinduism personally has anything to offer Dalits because it's not a emancipatory religion. It's not even Christians and Muslims and other Buddhists. They at least have some philosophical bent to try and improve the lot of the poor. Hinduism is more fatalistic in that sense, that you're born into something and you can't change to a higher caste or anything like that. So it's very difficult for Dalits to, support Hinduism in that sense. So I don't think that outreach to untouchables may be useful for the BJP in an electoral sense, but I don't think they have much to offer philosophically to the Dalits.
So then why didn't Dalits ever have to flee India? Why did they have to flee East Pakistan?
Well, because the Muslim fundamentalists basically they don't like Hindus. I mean, there is that animosity there among the more fundamentalist Muslims, and so they drove them out. They killed them. They stole their land. I mean, there's property interests there as well. But basically, that's the reason they had to keep fleeing even after partition. So I mean, that way that's a problem for Muslims as well, because they have internal divisions and fundamentalists, as well as Hindus having fundamentalists. They also have their own fundamentalists, and they're also violent. So they drove them out. So that's a big problem with getting a Hindu-Muslim alliance, or I should say a Dalit-Muslim alliance, is because there's a history there of attacks and things like that. So that's why it's difficult to form a modern coalition when you have that history behind you.
So in one of your papers, you named and kind of thanked Deep Haldar, Sanjeev Sanyal, and Bibek Debroy for speaking about bringing these topics up in the Indian mainstream. What do you think of these three people, the late Bibek Debroy and Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal and Deep Haldar?
Well, I don't know them personally. I've never met them. So all I can do is go on what they've written or posted online. So personally, I can't really say. I know Deep Haldar, I sent him a message out trying to see if he could get my book published, and I never got a reply. So, but I mean, on a personal level, I have no idea what he's like. I just know that he did publicize the massacre and he published a book on it.
Yes,
I'm grateful for that he did that.
Yeah,
So, and the others, anyone who speaks up, regardless of their political position or support, if they say something about that, that's positive to me. And I don't really go into their politics very much or what their personal views are. I'm more interested in seeing who's actually studying it, who's actually writing about it, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Sir, actually, it's in 2011 that I even heard the name Marichjhapi for the first time in my life. Before that, I didn't even ever hear about it. Right when people realized that, yeah, CPIM is kind of about to go out of power, people started talking about it and people started making documentaries and stuff. What was 2011 like for you? Did you feel some personal joy at CPIM getting defeated?
Well, I felt they were corrupt. They were ruthless. And I should say, one of my father's sister's husband was a judge in Calcutta. I mean, in Calcutta, so it wasn't rural land, but the CPM basically took part of his land away. And it was basically, he couldn't do anything, even though he'd been a judge, he couldn't do anything about it because it's supported by gundas, basically. It's, the
Yes.
crime had mingled with the CPM to such an extent that people were afraid of them. So your property wasn't safe, even though it's urban land and was perfectly legal. It doesn't matter. They have the gundas. They have the muscle behind them. Most political parties have muscle behind them nowadays. So people have to be afraid, So, I mean, I was no fan of them at the time. And certainly Marichjhapi turned me off. So in some sense, I hope that the TMC would investigate it as they promised to do, but then I became disillusioned with them because they didn't do anything about it either. And they also showed signs of corruption and all that themselves, and nepotism and the whole bit. And so that's why it's good to have an electoral democracy, because then if people become too corrupt, you can change the government, which isn't always the case, in dictatorships. So, I mean, in that sense, I was relieved. But then the TMC also showed some of the same problems that the CPM and that had. So, it's basically disillusioning, I would say, all around.
Sir, you called CPIM Stalinist. What is there any form of Marxist politics that can be, let's say, applied in a sane country or in a sane way? What non-Stalinist ways would there be of doing a communist party?
Well, I mean, the RSP, for instance, was accused of being Trotskyist. So Trotsky and Stalin, Stalin killed Trotsky. I mean, there's a whole lot of internal divisions in the left, including in the left front itself. So, I mean, there are more moderate ones that, don't go around killing all their political opponents. So, I mean, it's not something, it's not something that is universal. I mean, the left, like the right, has a wide range of the political spectrum, and some may be better than others, So I want to say, but I just say on the Marichjhapi, the left, really, I sent to a lot of leftist journals, scholarly journals, who weren't Stalinists at all, but they still wouldn't publish it. So, I mean, they have some mental blocks, I would say. They're not very open to discussion publicly about their differences. So that's a disappointment for me, that they wouldn't actually publish something about a massacre that the left did. They should be self-critical enough to actually publicize their defects, which they didn't do.
Sir, unlike the Trinamool, CPIM, even Congress before that, mostly had leading leaders who came from quote-unquote good families, well-educated families, elite families, meaning mainly Brahmin Vaidya Kaista families of Kolkata. Then why do all these people in CPIM immediately after entering CPIM become violent and corrupt to this extent? What is in Marxism or Stalinism that completely molds the minds of these people? They were not corrupt and violent when they were inside their growing up in their families, obviously. What's the magical object inside the CPIM party offices that are creating these monsters out of these humans?
Well, I don't think it's just the left. I mean, the right has that problem as well. Any people who get power tend to get corrupt. They become arrogant. They see money and they see an opportunity, so they grab it. Because that's a problem. And the old intellectuals of the CPM and the CPI were actually quite austere. They didn't actually take the money themselves. But when you get into power, you had a very small base. They had to expand their base, so they started to expand into people who weren't as committed and were opportunists. So that's one of the motives. If you want manpower, you got to offer something. And so then they didn't control the corruption enough. So and they also, because they were repressed themselves and spent time in jail, and the Congress repressed them, when they got to power, they started to do the same things to protect themselves. And so it was an escalating decline in standards from the colonial period onward, that they were each getting their own gundas and power banks and vote banks, and so it was a gradual deterioration. So law and order declined, corruption increased. So eventually they alienated the population themselves. So they really have to go back to the roots and start rethinking, how they handle these things, because
Hmm.
things have become so corrupt and so violent. It's become hard to differentiate. And I
Hmm.
don't know how you turn around a society. It takes a long time to do that. It's a cultural thing as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know what will happen in the end. It seems to be getting worse, but I don't know. We'll see.
As a scholar and researcher, uh, how would you suggest a government to, or let's say, how do you think can such dependency on goons be reversed? Can an intention to do great capitalism and business and free markets, can that lead to a decline in Gundaism? Because then you would have to take care of law and order in order to bring investments in and stuff. Otherwise, how do we solve this problem?
Well, I think it starts with the government. The government shouldn't be sending around death squads to kill people. They shouldn't be, arresting people, outside of law, when there's no evidence against them. And the current national government does that. I mean, there was someone just a few hundred miles from where I live in Canada who was murdered by the government. So, I mean, they're having death squads going abroad even. They do it locally, but they're also doing it abroad now. So, I mean, the government has to put their foot down, say, we'll adhere to the law. We will not employ gundas. We've got enough power as a government already. I think it has to start with the government. And then they can prosecute. If the opposition actually commits murders, they should investigate it and do something about it. But they shouldn't go and trumped up charges. So I think it has to start with the BJP now. Get things under control, stop their hit squads and going around assassinating people abroad and things like that. And if the government shows an example, and only prosecutes when there's real evidence against the opposition, then that would improve things, and I think there's things to be gained from that. But people are so interested in getting more and more power, they just throw the law overboard, and they use the law against their opponents, and it becomes a cycle of violence instead of calming things down. And I think the government has to change that. They gained from that, I think, in the end, but they're more interested in short-term gains, the next election, and all that sort of thing. So I think it really does have to come from the top down, and start to change that. But no one's done that. It just seemed to go from bad to worse. And that's been the history of India since independence. It's gone from bad to worse. And all the precedents of what they're doing now are basically started by their Congress predecessors. It's not a new thing. And they just did more of it instead of cutting it off.
Now, sir, India is a pretty poor country with $2,500 GDP per capita. Now, is it better for a poor country like India to wait for UN to take care of things and hope that USA doesn't influence UN too much, or simply kill a terrorist in Canada?
Well, I don't know where the UN comes in, because no one follows it. It follows it anyway. I mean, it's really up to the government of India to control itself.
Other than UN and
India's lost its reputation by killing people abroad. India's damaged its reputation in the West, at least, horribly. I mean, what the government did in India is really, it's good to have a good reputation abroad, and it's damaged the Indian brand by doing that. So it's counterproductive. Sending death squads, around the world. It doesn't help. It makes it bad, and it can't claim to be democracy very much if they start doing that. So you really have to control their own violence first, and the UN is basically pretty impotent because it depends on the great powers and things like that. So I don't think it's so much a UN thing; it's a domestic thing that they have to get it under control, and they should be aware of the ramifications of what they're doing. But that's my opinion on it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I feel it's just going to get worse, to be quite frank.
Then how about the incentive to do capitalism and development as a way to tone down the gundaism and application of goons?
Well, you see, the problem is big capitalists. I mean, they pay off the political parties. They demanded the election. So basically, they're in cahoots with the government. Whatever government's in power, a big capitalist who want to be on the good side. So I don't think the capitalists as such are going to change it. And
no, but he'll require a law and order, a place where there is great law and order and there aren't any political goons running about. That would be a basic requirement, right?
Yeah, I mean, the capitalists would like to have, a rule of law. So in that sense, and not have to bribe political parties all the time. Get rid of the corruption. So make it easy to do business. That would be a help. And West Bengal has not been a place that's easy to do business in. There's a lot of hurdles, and there's a lot of violence and things like that. And if you don't have security, business won't want to go there. They want to go to the safest state. So that's a problem. And so I think the dependence of politicians on big business is also bad, because then they implement the policies of big business. There has to be
Yes.
some autonomy. But
Yes.
it is a big problem. But development may help, but it's a trickle down thing. It takes time for that to happen. And you got to change the culture. You got to change the business environment. It's a holistic approach. But India has a large market, so I mean, capitalists will be interested in investing in it. And they've done that a lot. India's changed a lot since I went. I went first in 1977, and if you go back to India today, it's like Delhi, places like that. It's a hugely different view. You know, there's a lot
Yeah.
of infrastructure development. They have telephones that are available and things like that, which they didn't
Yes.
have very much in 1977. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, so it has changed, and economically for the better, I think. But in terms of socially, actually, there's more inequality now in India than there was under colonialism. The British, the gap between the poorest and the richest was less under colonialism than it is now, because now you got multi-billionaires and things like that, and
Yeah.
and it's the same problem in America too. Of course, it's not just India, but in India it's particularly bad because you know the poor are so much poorer, and they resent what the very rich have, and the very rich are very ostentatious, so they just display their wealth, which is also a bad look, so. There's a lot has to be done here.
Sir, do you think it is only countries like India who, like you said, lose their reputation once they send death squads to kill a terrorist who will harm their country? Or does America also lose its reputation? And does it matter to them if they lose their reputation by harming other countries?
Well, they've been doing that for a long time in America,
right?
And so their reputation is hurt. I mean, if you look at poll surveys of how America's seen in the rest of the world, I mean, it's about the last country. I mean, maybe Israel's worse, but I mean, really, in Canada they want to invade the country or take it over. So they've alienated everybody under this current administration. So it's got a very bad reputation because it has more power. It's even worse than India because India can't really do that much, but America can go all over the world and overthrow governments and do all this. So they've got a very bad reputation these days. It may change with a new administration, but. Yeah, it's bad. Both of them have bad reputations abroad, I would say. But
then then what I'm wondering is, does reputation matter at all?
Well, it does in terms of tourism, for one thing. I mean,
right.
America's lost a lot of tourism because they're all afraid of being arrested. So it hurts in tourism, and tourism is a major industry. Goodwill is something that you may not seem to monetize, but the fact that it's goodwill towards a country means you may not get sanctions. You may get better exports deals and things like that. So reputation does matter. It may not matter with everybody, but certainly with elites and decision makers and things like that, that can make a difference.
Now, sir, coming back to Marichjhapi, have you read Miss Anuj Alai's research on this, that the tigers of Marichjhapi became man-eaters because of the Marichjhapi massacre?
Yeah, I've read that. I've talked to her. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of that research?
It's not my field. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not even a historian of that. So, but she told me that there were killings of people by tigers before Marichjhapi, but that is what she's explaining is that's the popular view in the Sundarbans among villagers that they were friendly before, and now because of Marichjhapi, they acquired a taste for human flesh, and so that's why they're doing it. But if you look at it historically, even she admitted under the British Raj there were killings of people by tigers. So, it's possible it may have increased the amount of killings, or it may be that the tigers are under more pressure with encroachment, and more people are going into the jungle, so more of them get killed. So, but what she was saying is that's a popular impression. It doesn't mean that she believes it totally or anything like that. So I think it's perfectly valid. I think it's an interesting observation that's how the people feel about it, that Marichjhapi caused them to do that. And I think that's a very interesting observation. And it's useful for seeing how local people do it. Like, for instance, in Marichjhapi, she found that I think it was 3/4 of the people in Marichjhapi were killed by the government. That's the oral evidence from the people who live there. Now, is that true or not? I don't know. I mean, popular feelings may be more than it is actually the facts. I mean, that can happen. But the fact that it's a myth or it's a story is important because that's how people feel, and that's how to react in election time, things like that. So it's important for anthropologists to say what people think, whether or not it's actually empirically provable. So I think she did a good job of mentioning that. And I didn't mention that because I didn't know that. I didn't talk to people who said that because, to be quite frank, I mixed more with, because of my family background, I tended to mix more with people in the elite, intellectuals and things like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't get the popular view after the massacre of what people thought to the same extent that she did, because she went and lived in the villages and actually talked to them and
Okay.
found out all these things. So I think it's good that she brought that out. That's one of the things that was important to know. When you go to kill people, you know, the stories that come out afterwards can be very detrimental to the environment, to the government, and things like that. So people tend to ignore these people because they're not literate necessarily, you know. But I think it's an important contribution.
Sir, how far do you think we are, we as in any Indian government or any state government in India, how far are they from doing another massacre like Marichjhapi? What would it take for another government to do something like that? Would it take another one single dictatorial person like Jyoti Basu, or would it take another entire party to stand behind such a decision?
What, even a decision to kill people?
Yes,
I
and
don't
in
know.
this extent, this blatantly, this brazenly, and this shamelessly.
Well, any government can do it. I mean, if they have the power, it's a question of power. If you got the gundas, you got the police behind you, they can go and do anything. Like, that's a danger particularly for Muslims. The government can go and do that, and probably not many people try and stop it, and they don't have the arms. So, I mean, it can happen at any time. Frankly, if the group you don't like is hated enough by the government, they can do it, and if they have enough power, they can get away with it. You know, so that's what happened. I mean, with the killing of the Sikhs. You know, it was an assassination set it off, and that was happened. You know, so Congress got away with the Sikh thing pretty well. I mean, how many have been prosecuted on that? And the Congress got away with it with this. And what's happening in Kashmir, the government has got away with whatever it's doing. You know, so I mean, any government that has the power and the motivation can probably do it, unless there's a higher authority, like a national government that's willing to come in. But if you're the national government, you can do pretty much what you want. And state governments also, if they belong to the same political party as the national government or they're allied with them, they can do it as well. Mobs can do it as well. You don't have to have the government behind you. Mobs can do it. And that's this thing against the Muslims that can escalate into a real massacre. And that has international implications because people in the Middle East won't like it very much, and India could become under oil sanctions or something like that if it gets too far. So I mean, the Muslims have a global power that untouchables don't have, because Muslims are all over the world. They control government's resources. Dalits, you know, have nothing basically. There's no one who's going to support them. They can only have to support themselves. So the human rights community in the West, or in America for that matter, is pretty weak. So that's where the Dalits are in a particularly vulnerable position, and they also don't have as much education and financing and things like that. But you know, when you start to attack Muslims, then there becomes international reputation that becomes at stake. So the BJP has to be very careful to control it. If they let their followers go around discriminating and killing, then you know there could be international repercussions that won't be good for India if India comes under sanctions and things like that. So in some ways, the Muslims are in a much better position, you know, than the Dalits are. But given the common problem they have, I think there should be an alliance.
So I think it would be pretty fair to say that Jews have some sort of global say or power. Christians do, just like you said. Muslims definitely do. Do you think? And you said Dalits do not have that power. Do you think non-Dalit Hindus have that power?
Non-Dalit Hindus? You mean upper castes?
Yeah, general castes, upper castes, middle castes.
Yeah. They don't have as much because they don't have an international diaspora as much to say, but they're getting more powerful. They're trying to influence U.S. policy and things like that. So they're getting more powerful and they're getting more financial backing and things like that. So in that sense, internationally, they're getting more power. But they've been in power for 2,000 years, basically, you know. So they've been the dominant group. So they have a lot of advantages going in socially. In terms of families and things like that, they have a lot more power, and that's not going to go away. That's probably going to accentuate. So they may not have how would you say, foreign governments that are that, but they certainly have a lot of power in India, and I don't see that diminishing in the short term, even in India. And they know how to manipulate things quite well because they have the education, the resources to handle that.
Yes. Now, sir, just like the Marichjhapi massacre, there was another massacre that people never talk of, and that was kind of forgotten. And even there, the official numbers are minuscule, and the colloquial numbers are insanely high, about 5,000. Which is there was a separate subcaste under the Brahmin Varna called Chitpavan Brahmins in Maharashtra who got massacred by Congress workers because Nathuram Godse killed Mahatma Gandhi. Right after that, there was a massacre of Chitpavan Brahmins in Maharashtra, in which Veer Savarkar, such a significant leader, even his own sibling, his younger brother, was beaten to death by Congress workers. So, as you said, if the political parties want it, or the party in power wants a massacre to happen, it will happen. So, my question is, both in the context of simply not doing, not using too many goons, etc., or not doing massacres, do we have anything else, anything other than simply hoping that those people in power are good people, nice people, and they won't do you any harm? Is there anything to offer other than hope?
But if you're powerless, that's all you got is hope or international publicity and or something like that, So it depends what your power is. So I mean, that massacre, I know virtually nothing about it, So I can't comment on that because I never researched it, and it's only a vague memory to me as far as what it's about. So I don't know about that. I mean, there's other massacres too. A lot of people were killed when Nehru decided to take over the Nizam of Hyderabad's territory. And there was an order to kill them. It just happened, in the conflict. So in that sense, there's some distance between it. Whether he tried to stop it or not is another question. But in terms of Marichjhapi, what's different about Marichjhapi is it's an order from the chief minister. It's a very different kind of complicity because it's an order. It's not just keeping quiet. He actually sent in his police. It's a state doing it. And when the state does it, of course, they're well armed. They've got much more power to kill a lot more people. And that's why Marichjhapi was so bad. It's not just some gundas attacking another group. It's the state behind it. And only the state has that kind of power. And that's what makes Marichjhapi different. But it's also different because no one investigated, because it is a state. And the part of the state, the police did the killing. So they don't want to investigate it. That goes for other governments as well, because it makes the whole state and government look bad. And frequently when governments change, the police change over and they support the government. So if the government investigates it and the police are involved, then it also looks bad for them because they've got their own police personnel implicated. So there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want to investigate it. And that goes for the current government in West Bengal as well. The police will support them because they have the government, and there may be police officers still alive, probably retired now, but still alive, who could be prosecuted. They may not want to do that. So that's a test, whether the people who are still alive in the police are going to be prosecuted or not. So we'll see. I mean, it'll take an investigation, which no one's been willing to do, even though the names of them are known, in some cases. And there's the gangsters that did it as well. That would require an investigation to see why they were released from prison and how much they were paid to go and attack the refugees, so that would implicate the government as well at the time. So there's a lot that could be found out, but no one's doing it really, except for individual researchers.
Sir, would you write a letter to the current Chief Minister of West Bengal, or even an open letter asking him to relook into the Marichjhapi massacre?
I could, but I don't think it's necessary, because when he was in opposition, he promised to do an investigation. So he knows about the massacre. He knows what happened. Even when he was in the Criminal Congress and he was a minister there, he knew what happened. It was discussed by the Criminal Congress, and they promised an investigation. So he's perfectly well informed about it. And he promised to do it when he came to power. Now he's in power. Now let's see if he does it. So he knows all about it. So it depends on what his own attitude is, and he can do it. And he's got the backing of the central government. So it's been a good time to investigate it now, in a sense, because there's no one to stop him. And so it just depends on his own political will. So, and he's aware of the situation. So we'll just wait and see. He hasn't done it yet, and he's done other things already. So it doesn't look promising, let's put it that way. But you've got to give him time. He's just got into office, so we'll see.
Yeah, but an open letter from you that goes viral on Facebook, Twitter, that would be great to remind him as well.
Well, I could write the letter, but I have no influence. I can't even get my own book published. So how much influence do I have? I got none. I can't even get my own book published, so I don't think it'll make any difference. I don't have a following of my own.
No, we'll make sure of it.
Okay, well, I can write it.
Yeah, please do. Now, sir, if we only have to hope from politicians, do you have any hope from the current dispensation, Trinamool, CPM, BJP, whoever it is, that they will be able to completely solve casteism or caste-based bad behavior, or simply the segregation of, quote unquote, segregation of Dalits, like you pointed out? Will that ever go away, or is it a problem forever?
Well, it's a problem forever until people change their prejudices. I mean, there's laws against it now, but it's still segregated because it's in people's minds. And how do you change people's minds? It's a cultural thing. It's a religious thing. It's extremely, and the reason it doesn't happen basically anywhere else in the world now, because apartheid's gone, segregation in the American South is gone, because people change their mind and the government put their foot down, or they overthrew them, or whatever the reason was. It doesn't exist anymore anywhere else, basically, except in some isolated places and countries that don't have that much clout. But the fact that it still exists, even though the laws have changed and it's illegal, they still do it. How do you change the society? Why do you still live in endogamy in Hinduism? All these issues are there, and you can use better force, you can have better law enforcement, but you've also got to change their attitude. So it requires education. That's a long-term thing. Maybe in several generations it'll be gone, but it's not going to happen very soon. I don't see it as something that's happening soon. And I think if a government, like the BJP at the national and the state level, I don't know if their own base would tolerate desegregation, because they say they want to include Dalits and they want to include tribals and things like that. But if they actually enforce desegregation in the villages, would their electorate put up with that? I have my doubts. And it's historically, desegregation is political suicide for any ruling party if they actually implemented it. So the political elites passed the laws and then they did very little about it. It's because it's politically deadly. Even Muslims and Christians practice segregation and things like that, even though it's not in their religion. They still practice it because that's a custom in India, and they've assimilated Hindu beliefs. So it's a really tough call. It's changing people's attitude. So I don't know. I don't see any short-term solutions to it. But maybe with more development, more education, things will start to break down and there'll be improvements. But that's not in my lifetime. That you're talking future generations, end of the century stuff. That sort of thing.
Okay then, sir. Hope to catch up with you soon. We'll end our conversation today here. It was very, very awesome to talk to you. It was a hugely humbling experience, and I'm very, very honored, very humbled that you even considered replying to my mail and came to my podcast. Thank you, sir.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining our live stream. Bye-bye. See you all soon.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।